Hi, I'm Greg Lefebvre, creator and host of the Compulsive Storyteller podcast. Welcome to another segment of Pass the Mic, where we invite talented guests, artists, writers, actors, musicians, and others to join us on the pod to tell a great story and then to chat with me about the art of storytelling. I am excited to have Danielle Dardashti, host, writer, director, and senior producer on the show today. Danielle is an Emmy Award-winning documentary writer and producer, a former on-air TV news reporter, and a StorySLAM champion who's been featured on NPR's Moth radio hour. She is the co-author of the Jewish Family Fun Book and co-founder, creative director of the live storytelling show Storyboom. She also leads corporate storytelling workshops all over the world. Welcome to Pass the Mic, Danielle.
Hi, Greg. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So you have a new hit podcast called The Nightingale of Iran, and you're going to tell us how it got started and more about it.
Yes, I love telling stories about stories. The Nightingale of Iran is a documentary podcast series that I created with my sister Galit, and it all got started during the pandemic. We had more time on our hands, and Galit and I decided to do some investigating into the details around our famous Persian Jewish family, why they left Iran during a time that was considered the golden age for Jews in Iran. Our grandfather was an orphan raised in Iran's Jewish ghetto, and he always had a gorgeous singing voice. And the story of how he was discovered is incredibly dramatic. It was around 1950, and he was at a party when the power went out. And in the dark, he started singing, and that was the moment that his whole life changed. He became the most famous singer in Iran, and he was called the Nightingale of Iran. He sang in the Shah's palace and on the radio, and he was loved by Muslims in Iran. And about a decade later, his oldest son, my dad, at 19 years old, got his own TV show singing pop music. He became a teen idol in Tehran. But 6 months after he got his own show, our dad left the country at 19 years old and gave it all up, abandoned his Iranian identity. And none of this story ever made any sense to me and my sister. We wanted to know why our dad would have left Iran when he did during that golden age for Jews in Iran, and why our grandfather and the rest of the family left shortly after, why they decided to leave it all behind, and how we ended up so completely un-Persian. Because in addition to having more time during the pandemic, I also had an existential crisis. Who am I? I felt panicked at that time that the older generation, the people who remember these stories, were getting older. And I felt a sense of urgency and anxiety that I needed to talk to them now to preserve our family stories, solve all the mysteries about what happened back then, and figure out what it means for us now here. Yeah, so Galit and I started talking to people all over the world, mostly Zoom conversations, and each conversation that we had would lead to another conversation and then another. And gradually we started piecing the story together. And then we discovered a treasure trove of audio tapes in our parents' basement, because when our dad left Iran and came to America, he and his family would send each other these audio tapes because phone calls and flights were really expensive back then. So they'd record these tapes, hours and hours of tape, like audio diaries, telling each other everything about everything going on in their lives. And those tapes helped us put so many pieces of the story together and tell this story so vividly. It was like traveling back in time for us, hearing these conversations describing so many details of their lives, singing each other's songs, recording family celebrations. So, through those tapes that we found and through the interviews that we did with people all over the world, Galit and I found a lot of the answers that we were looking for. And some of it was pretty painful stuff, not easy to listen to.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We worried how our dad would react to him, to us telling his story. We wondered if he would disagree with what we were saying about his life, or whether it would be hurtful to him, whether he'd be angry about the way we were presenting the past. And we wondered if our parents would be upset that we put this story out there so publicly for all the world to see. So when we developed the pilot for the series, we sat our mom and dad down in my living room so that we could play that first episode for them. And while they listened to the pilot, Galit and I just sat there. My parents were on the couch in my living room, and Galit and I sat in chairs like on either side of them, just like staring at them while they were listening to the first episode of the podcast, wanting to see their reaction to it. And it was hard to read their reaction while they listened. They were like in deep thought, smiling at times, but mostly just listening. And then at the very end of the episode, it ends where there's a cliffhanger to listen to the next episode, episode 2, to find out more. And our dad looks up at us with a smile on his face and he says, "Wow, I can't wait to hear what happens next. Did you find out why I left Iran?"
Oh, that's great.
And it was really amazing to us how he was on this journey along, like he was a listener to the story, and he's been amazingly open to hearing his story told by us in a new way. And he's honored that we've spent the last few years looking at his life so closely. And now it's very exciting for everyone in the family because the show is a huge hit. It's topping the charts on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. It's the number one Jewish podcast in the world. It's featured by Apple and Amazon as a new and noteworthy show. We're getting all kinds of buzz and awards attention. And for the first time in my life, I feel less un-Persian than I did before. I feel a little bit Persian, and it's kind of cool. So it's interesting what this story and it's the story arc of the story has done in our family.
Oh, that's fantastic. Tell me a little bit about the dynamic of working with your sister.
Wow. So it's been really, really exciting for us. We have very different kinds of strengths and talents. My sister is a musician and composer, and she has a doctorate in Middle Eastern Jewish culture. So she's an expert in the subject matter that we're talking about. Also, our podcast has a mesmerizing soundtrack with it. It's music that my sister wrote and music of my grandfather and my father, and it's really incredible music, and my sister's responsible for all of that. I am a storyteller and documentarian, so our talents worked really well together, and we've never done a project together. This was the first time we had, but it's been really cool. She and I are really good friends. We live 5 minutes from each other, but we've never worked together. So it's interesting. It's kind of like bring your sister to work day every day.
Right. Great. So it's interesting that in my podcast, The Compulsive Storyteller, I have a story called Never Bet Your Car. And when I was in my early 20s, I married into a big extended Jewish family in the Bronx. And I was the first Gentile to be a member of the family, and it's a pretty interesting story. It was a very complicated relationship. So anyway, that's just a little aside. So.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you're kind of the outsider
Yes.
in a situation. And actually, my mom talks about that being how she felt, because my mom is not Persian and married into this big Persian
Ah, so
family.
she's in the same boat. Yeah. What's your mother's background?
So my mom is an Ashkenazi Jewish girl from New York,
Okay.
and she married into this famous Persian Jewish family with a very rich culture, and it's an interesting thing. And my mom, but then my dad also had an experience as an outsider moving from Iran to America, where he was really kind of adopted sort of by my mom's family because his parents lived so far away. So he was sort of the outsider here, but then when they'd go and spend time with his family, she was the outsider. So yeah, Greg, our story is all about that. Our story is all about being an outsider. Yeah, and how that
When
feels.
he was adopted by his family here, he was completely accepted.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, you have to listen to the story because it's not as simple as that. My dad assimilated in a way that is really, really an interesting phenomenon. And my sister and I had never really thought it through, like the whole process, um, until we did this project. And episode 4 of our 6 episode series is actually called Ashka Normalization.
Hmm.
And it's all about that assimilation that our dad kind of intentionally did for a variety of reasons when he moved to America to fit in, um, and also for career reasons. So yeah, it's a something that is a very interesting. We're getting people from all over the world reaching out to us who are listening to our podcast, The Nightingale of
Hmm.
Iran, who identify, even whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, Iranian or not Iranian, everybody has felt like an outsider at some point in their life and felt like they needed to adapt in a certain way to become, whether it's at work or socially. And the stories that we're hearing from people all over the world who are identifying with the story we're telling are really unbelievable and overwhelming and very, very moving for us.
Is there one particular story that's sort of a real nugget that, in a way, is emblematic of all your stories that you uncovered?
Well, you know, there's a secret, kind of a painful secret that we that sort of was the turning point for us in our really trying to understand why our family left Iran and understand the reasons why a lot of things happened that never really made sense to us. And those are some things that we talk about in episodes 2 and 3. And they literally took 2 episodes for us to sort of explain. So it's kind of hard for me to summarize it right here. But I'll
Got you.
tell you that in episode 2, there's an interview that Galit and I do with an Iranian Muslim man in his 70s named Habib, who tells an incredible story of his friendship with our grandfather, who was a religious Jew in Iran and a famous singer, and had this very close friendship with this much younger Muslim man who was also famous. He was a famous wrestler at the time. And they
Hmm.
had this friendship. And the interview was really surprising to Galit and I because Habib had a picture of our grandfather hanging on his refrigerator. It was a Zoom interview we did with him, and he took his laptop and walked into his kitchen to show it to us. And we were really taken aback that I mean, our grandfather died in the 90s. And here, this man who we've never met has our grandfather's picture on his refrigerator and had such a meaningful relationship with him. And he's a Muslim man who was the nephew of the Ayatollah there at the time. And our grandfather was a religious Jew.
Hmm.
It was an interesting thing because our grandfather was loved by Muslims in Iran, and it was a time when Iran and Israel were friends and had an incredible relationship as countries. And so it was really surprised. There were so many moments during our interviews that surprised us, but our interview with Habib in particular was really surprising because of what a different time it was back then in Iran than
Hmm.
where we are today, with Iran and Israel at war with each other, and the issues that are going on in the world today.
Have you always been a storyteller, or how did you get started telling stories?
Yeah, I think I've always been a storyteller. Even as a little kid, I just remember like my grandmother and my parents always saying, "Oh, Danielle, tell the story about fortunately and unfortunately." I had a couple of stories that I would always get up and tell, at various family gatherings and things. But my major in college was journalism, and I was a television reporter on air for the first decade of my career, and then got into producing documentaries and
Hmm.
have just done various things related to storytelling since then. I do some story coaching and I lead storytelling workshops in the corporate world, and I help companies make documentaries. Yeah, it's just, for me, storytelling is really about being so curious about all each person that I see in the world, and understanding that underneath the surface there's a story there, and each person that I see walking down the street is the protagonist of their own life story.
Exactly. So I'm particularly interested in when you were very young. In my case, my family sort of competed in storytelling at the dinner table and sort of besting each other. And as we left the home and went out into the world, when any of us had a particularly interesting story that happened to us on a particular day, we would call everybody else. And so I would take a story of something that happened in my day, and then I would call 5 people. And that really reinforced the story. So it became part of my repertoire.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
What's interesting is a lot of people who listen to my podcast say, well, how can you possibly remember all these things? And how can all these things have happened to you? But I remember them because they were reinforced and sort of put into the vault, and they don't go away. But that's because I told them multiple times right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of like photographs where you can't really remember if you actually remember the instance or if you remember it because you've seen the photograph of it. It's
Yes,
like
that's very
it's
apt.
like if you tell a story about something that happens, you're more likely to remember the instance, but you don't even know then if you're remembering the actual experience or you're just remembering the story because you've told it. I mean, you know what it's kind of like also? Dreaming. Like if you have a dream and you wake up in the morning and right away you tell someone about it or you write it down or something,
It sticks. Yeah.
it sticks, but
Yeah.
otherwise it's like gone.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think telling a story allows you to put into words your experiences and memories and make sense of the world and things that happen around you, and it's yeah.
So one story to another, this has been a great experience hearing your stories and going back and forth with it.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Great. My pleasure. My pleasure. So, okay. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And I look forward to chatting again sometime.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you ready to tell your own story on The Compulsive Storyteller? We're launching a new segment of guest storytelling, and we want to hear your stories. Email a voice recording to hello@thecompulsivestoryteller.com. I'll play selected stories on upcoming episodes. Try to be as clear as possible in your recording, and we reserve the right to lightly edit them for length and clarity. Leave your name or contact information in your voicemail or email, and let us know if you'd like the story to be anonymous. I can't wait to hear from you. The The Compulsive Storyteller is now co-produced by Greg Lefebvre and Fadia Montserrat, who's also arranged the music and created the special effects. Emily Ramon does design, research, editing, and marketing. Peter Kokoma has made our theme music and for many seasons co-produced the show with me. If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Compulsive Storyteller, and we'd love to hear from you. This podcast is independently produced, so we really appreciate all your help and support. Share the show with your friends, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. You can also check out our website, thecompulsivestoryteller.com, for more information. Thanks for listening, and if you didn't like this one, the next one will be another story. All characters and events portrayed in this podcast are based on my truth, with some names and facts changed for privacy. The conversations and dialogues are based on my best memory, but are not word-for-word recreations.